What if you could go back and fix everything? Dr. Eli Vance just did, 10 years into the past, armed with a device no one understands, and a heart full of regret. But time doesn't forget so easily. I thought I could have it all, but the fabric of reality is tearing. I have to make it right. Dr. Eli Vance, a man of thin frame and sharper mind, stood motionless before the final version of his life's ambition. A sleek, gray phone-sized object glowing with a pulse that mirrored a heartbeat. The Temporal Stasis Device, or TSD, was unassuming to the untrained eye, but to Eli, it was salvation incarnate. The lab around him hummed with fluorescent lights and cold machines, silent witnesses to what he had sacrificed. Friendships faded, lovers lost, time wasted under the boot of anonymity. The TSD wasn't just a machine, it was a scalpel to slice cleanly through regret. His hands trembled as he activated it, coordinates set to 10 years prior. No test runs, no farewell messages, just a single hope to fix it all. When Eli opened his eyes, he was in his old apartment, 2015, just before everything had begun to rot. The air was denser, richer, with opportunity. He gasped, touched the countertop, smelled the aged wood of the window frames. It had worked. He had arrived. This time, he played his cards with precision. He reconnected with Mara. Mara, the one who had slipped through his fingers like sand. He remembered her laughter, her cutting wit, the way she smelled like oranges in the morning. 10 years ago, he had confessed too late. Now he found her at a conference, casual, confident, knowing the outcome before it happened. He listened more, talked less, adjusted his reactions with surgical empathy. Slowly, she warmed. He filed the patent for his stasis field design, months before the theoretical groundwork had ever been publicly discussed. Overnight, he was hailed as a genius ahead of his time. The media dubbed him the man from tomorrow. Venture capitalists flooded in. The overlooked nobody became a face on magazine covers, speaking at TED Talks, walking red carpets in awkward suits. For a while, everything glittered, but gold loses its shimmer when held too long. It began with small things, trivialities that felt like splinters in the brain. His neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, always used to bake lemon bars on Saturdays, but now it was cinnamon bread. A barista at his favorite coffee shop, someone who should have moved away years ago, was still there, looking slightly off, as if mimicking familiarity but missing something vital. Eli brushed it aside. Temporal relocation was bound to rattle some details. He buried himself in work, Mara, and public life, but the dissonance worsened. At a gala, someone handed him a photo, one from a celebratory fundraiser weeks earlier. Everyone was there, Mara, his research partners, even a few politicians he barely tolerated. Yet one thing made his breath hitch. There he was, in the background, same suit he owned but didn't recall wearing, a hollow look in his eyes, lips slightly parted as if caught mid-thought. His face was a fraction older, more worn. He didn't remember being at that event. He certainly didn't remember that expression. Later that night, a news anchor briefly mentioned a rare magnetic anomaly in the Pacific, a footnote buried beneath celebratory gossip. Eli barely listened, but something in him stirred. A whisper, distant and low, echoing through his consciousness like the dying tone of a piano key stuck in an empty room. The world he crafted was no longer entirely his. The Temporal Stasis Device, once pristine and pulsing with steady rhythm, now gave off a slight whine when activated, like a violin string turned too tightly. Dr. Eli Vance, now a celebrated figure, sat in the back seat of his self-driving car, thumb gently pressing the interface. This wasn't another leap into the past, just a skip, a flicker, a minor correction. The last dinner with Mara had spiraled into an argument, nothing violent, but enough to leave her eyes dimmer the next day. He could fix that, one small jump 10 minutes prior. He could soften it, add a joke, maybe a compliment. He wasn't addicted, he told himself. He was refining, sharpening the edges of an otherwise flawless sculpture. But each adjustment, each stitch in time, tugged on a larger tapestry. The world began to fray. It was subtle at first. Stock markets began behaving irrationally, not from panic or politics, but from patterns no analyst could decode. Bees in parts of Europe began to vanish overnight, disrupting pollination. Strange auroras, vivid curtains of violet and gold, danced across skies where they shouldn't, gliding over Dubai and Sao Paulo like ribbons of misplaced wonder. Scientists were baffled, conspiracy theorists howled. Eli watched it all from his penthouse window, wine glass trembling in his grip. Then came the personal distortions. His colleague, Lita, a mathematician who had worked alongside him since the beginning, stopped recognizing references they used to share. An inside joke about Feynman diagrams, a song they used to hum during long nights in the lab. She smiled politely, but it was hollow. Even Mara began blinking more when he spoke, as if buffering before answering. The TSD grew unpredictable. Sometimes it took him seconds further than intended. Other times it didn't activate at all, just showed overlapping time stamps on the screen. He once caught a glimpse of himself standing beside the bed, watching Mara sleep, only to blink and find himself lying there, gasping or hammering. In the growing quiet of his apartment, Eli pulled out old VHS tapes, a relic from his childhood stored in a forgotten box. He connected a converter and watched, in grainy resolution, his younger self giggling as he chased his dog through falling leaves. No resets, no retakes, just joy and scraped knees. He read old journals, their ink faded but still legible, and found raw, awkward entries about heartbreak, failure, dreams that never panned out. But they were real. He understood then. He had not merely erased pain, he had scrubbed away the richness of being human. His perfect life was hollowed out, sanded smooth, until it lost all grip. One afternoon, as he sat in a cafe near the Riverwalk, a little girl walked by with her mother, holding a melting ice cream cone. She paused, tilted her head, and stared at him. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. Eli blinked. "What did you say?" But she was already gone, tugged away by her mother, leaving only the echo of her words and a sudden chill in the air. Above them, unnoticed by most, the auroras shimmered brighter than ever, like cracks in the sky. Dr. Eli Vance stood once again with the Temporal Stasis Device, a sleek, gray phone-sized object glowing with erratic pulses of light. It no longer felt like triumph. The hum it gave off vibrated through his bones, a low and persistent reminder of the weight it carried. Reality had thinned around him. Conversations unraveled mid-sentence. People forgot names, directions, entire years. Clocks in downtown Chicago ticked backward in brief, stuttering bursts, and the auroras in the sky had begun twisting. No longer ethereal, they looked like fractures in glass. So, he made a decision. One last leap, not to adjust or tweak, not to patch the seams of a broken paradise, but to go all the way back, before the patents, the fame, Mara, the life of obscurity, the one he had once despised. He keyed in the exact date of the original activation, the very first moment he left. The world lurched, and then it didn't. Eli opened his eyes to an unfamiliar stillness. The air smelled off like dust left too long on forgotten things. The city outside his window was quiet, almost dreamlike. The buildings stood where they had always had, but their edges were subtly wrong. The shapes warped like memories misremembered. He rushed to where the lab should have been, heart thudding against his ribs. It wasn't there. In its place was a grocery store, abandoned and half collapsed. Stray papers rustled across the sidewalk. Eli ran to the archives, searching for his name, for anything he had once touched. His published works, once proudly displayed in academic journals, no longer existed. Even Mara, who should have been somewhere, anywhere, was gone. Not dead, just different. A school teacher in Minneapolis. No memory of him. He tried to recenter himself, walked to his childhood park, expecting the comfort of a familiar bench beneath the oak tree where he used to read books too big for a boy his age. It was still there, but the tree was younger than it should have been, and the bench was made of metal, not wood. These were echoes, fragments of a world overridden. Desperate, he walked to his father's old garage, the one place untouched by time, or so he hoped. The tools were arranged differently, the floor, once stained with oil, and marked with childish scrawls, spotless. The garage had been sold decades ago in the new reality. Eli stood there in silence, summoned by the air that didn't feel like his own. Later, in a public restroom, he stared into the mirror. For a moment, his reflection lagged behind his movements. When it caught up, it flickered. Just once, a vision flashed. Eli, older, hunched and hollow-eyed, standing alone in a space filled with collapsing photographs and shredded journal pages. His mouth moved, but no sound came. The flicker vanished, the mirror returned to normal, but the hum followed him now, soft and ever-present, not mechanical, organic, with the ticking of a cosmic watch. He clutched the TSD, its glow growing weaker with each use. He now understood. The device had anchored everything to him. He was the pivot. Every choice, every change, it bent the universe inward. The auroras overhead twisted like veins across a dying sky, and time itself was beginning to forget what it meant to be whole. The equations filled every inch of the whiteboard. Symbols tangled like knots, overlapping timelines mapped as decaying spirals, not lines. Dr. Eli Vance stood before them, expression tight, a marker trembling in his hand. He had redrawn the universe a dozen times since it all began, but never like this. This wasn't about fixing the fabric. It was about tearing out the thread that started it all. Himself. The Temporal Stasis Device, once sleek and gleaming, now flickered in dull spasms. It sat beside him on the table like a relic. Its hum had faded into something weaker, more desperate. Each use had eaten away at time's architecture, and the cracks were no longer confined to the sky. People were glitching in real time, tired conversations skipping like broken records, buildings flickering between architecture styles, confused memories. He had tried everything, reversals, merges, stabilization fields, but time no longer obeyed laws. It whimpered and fractured around him like a wounded animal. In the end, his calculations brought him to a single, terrifying conclusion. He had to go back to the very first thought of the device, the flash of inspiration in his college dorm room when he had scribbled the core concept into a spiral notebook. That was the seed, the anomaly. If he could reach that moment and override it, erase the idea itself, he could undo everything. Reality would reroute, snap back, and he'll be the cost. Not the man who made a mistake, but the idea that never had a chance to form. He set the TSD with shaking fingers, entering coordinates he had never attempted. Temporal markers, not just of date, but of mindset, the moment of conception. The line blurred between time travel and metaphysical reversion, but he didn't need to survive it. He just needed it to work. In his dim apartment, surrounded by pages of torn calculations, journal entries written in tighter, more frantic script, Eli opened the fresh notebook and began writing his final entry. The ink bled slightly on the page, as if the universe itself resisted permanence. I wanted the world to know me, but I never stopped to ask who I was without it all. He paused, listening to the ticking silence. Outside, the auroras had become gashes in the heavens, leaking light that didn't belong. The stars were wrong. Some constellations were missing. Others had names no one remembered giving them. He set the pen down and picked up the TSD. It hummed softly, almost mournfully. His thumb hovered above the red button, the final override. The weight of everything he changed pressed in, but he no longer fought it. The ache in his chest wasn't fear, it was acceptance. He looked to the skyline one last time. Marl's laugh in a timeline he could never touch again. Lita's dry wit, his father's hand on his shoulder, oil smudged and proud. They would return. They would never know this version of him. Maybe that was alright. He smiled gently. Let it be enough. Pressed the button. There was no explosion, no cinematic burst of light or thunderclap to signal the end. Only silence. A stillness so deep, so profound, it felt like the world had paused to take a breath. And then, everything resumed as it once was. The sky over Earth was cloudless, unbroken, whole. No slashes of aurora light painted the heavens. No buildings flickered. No conversations fractured mid-sentence. Clocks ticked forward again. Traffic honked. People argued, kissed, laughed, wept. The world moved on, unaware that it had once nearly been torn apart. In a lab on the west side of Chicago, shelves lined with old journals and prototype components stood untouched. Dust coated everything evenly. The desk bore the name Dr. Eli Vance, but the name held no power anymore, no memory. The chair at the workstation was tucked neatly in. The blueprints of the Temporal Stasis Device were never drafted. The equations were never solved. The spark of invention never struck. And somewhere deep in the layers of time that had once bent and cracked, his presence was gone, not erased, released. Across town, the breeze moved gently through a university courtyard. Spring was arriving. The trees wore soft buds of green. The air carried the scent of lilac. Students moved across the cobblestone walkways, their backpacks bouncing with each step. One of them, a young woman in her late 20s, sharp-eyed and curious, paused by a rusted bench tucked beneath an old oak tree. There was nothing particularly special about it. The paint was chipped, the wood weathered from the seasons long past. But as she stood beside it, a strange sensation settled in her chest, a feeling of gravity, as if something had once sat here, heavy and unseen, and had finally chosen to let go. She reached out, brushed her fingers along the cool surface. For the briefest moment, the breeze whistled softly past her ear, a sound like a whisper, a memory not hers. And though she couldn't say why, she smiled, gentle and sad, and whispered back, "Thank you." Then she turned, walking on, unaware of the course she had just continued, uninterrupted and pure. The world turned, seasons changed, humanity dreamed, fell, rose, and dreamed again. And somewhere folded in the foundation of time itself, the echo of a man remained, not as a ghost or anomaly, but as a quiet balance restored. He had wanted the world to know him. In the end, the world never would, but it flourished because of him. Above the skyline, the stars were bright again, and time, for the first time in a long while, moved forward in peace.